All right, good morning, everyone. It's July 12th, I think, 11th.
It's July 11th because it's my mother's birthday, so I'm not sure, and I highly doubt and hope she's not watching this, but if she is, happy birthday to my mom.
All right, happy birthday. Great, Monday, July 11th, the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee is convening to take up a zoning text amendment proposed by Councilmember Friedson that is intended to support the growth of our life sciences sectors. Look forward to hearing from him about the plan, and we're joined virtually by Councilmember Jawando, and we're accompanied here in person by the Planning Department and Department of Permitting Services, and we've done a great job with the packet. Thank you. Why don't we start with Councilmember Friedson?
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I will echo your comments. Thank you, Ms. Nadeau, for all of your great work here. We try to put you to work and give you really complicated issues to grapple with, and always handled thoughtfully and really carefully, and I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be pushing this proposal forward. Really appreciate the support of colleagues. Appreciate your support in particular, Mr. Chair. It's part of our ongoing effort where we are trying to double down on our core strengths in Montgomery County, and biohealth really is one of the clear and obvious growth opportunities that we have benefited from, and have more that we can do in order to really take advantage of as we move forward. It's one of the real positives that came out of the really dark times of the pandemic, that Montgomery County is at the center of biohealth innovation in the world. All of the great advances that we have seen, so many of them start right here in Montgomery County, and it's critical that we be able to not just have the cutting edge research, but the development that applies that research and turns all of that incredible work into jobs, into economic opportunities, and into family supporting wages and ways that don't only improve lives but save lives, and that's really what this is about. So I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss this zoning text amendment. We introduced it in March. It's really intended to just serve as another tool in our toolkit to double down on biohealth. In February, the council unanimously passed our prior zoning text amendment, ZTA 2109, the Biohealth Priority Campus, which accelerated and streamlines the regulatory process for certain types of large biohealth projects. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback on that. In fact, it has been discussed specifically at a number of national conferences, talking about where to locate, where to invest, and where to work when it comes to the world of biohealth. This CTA in particular builds upon that effort to address really another unique challenge and aspect of the biohealth industry, which is to really accommodate the equipment needed for research and development and manufacturing. In many cases, the urban areas of the county and the zoning code do not accommodate our interest in having both a thriving suburban bio industry and an emerging urban bio industry, and the strongest biohealth areas in the country have both. And so, when you talk about needing higher ceilings for the increased equipment, oftentimes fewer floors. That's especially true in urban areas where land is more constricted, and so this ZTA will allow for additional height and transit-served areas. After introducing the zoning text amendment in March, we received a lot of feedback, mostly overwhelmingly positive, but also some constructive feedback on how to narrow the focus of the zoning text amendment to make sure that we were achieving its core objectives without having broader applications. And so we have worked together with all the stakeholders. Really appreciate planning, Ms. Nadeau, outside stakeholders to come up with a series of amendments that are really well laid out, I think, in this packet to try to make sure that we are as targeted and focused in this effort as possible. I'll let Ms. Nadeau go through the list of those items in more detail, but in a nutshell, the suggestions for revision limit the impact of potential taller buildings by limiting the impact to major roads and lowering the additional height allowed over mapped heights which will limit the benefit to properties mapped at 100 feet or less, which is really the core goal here. These changes and more were outlined in the June 8th memo to co-sponsors, as you'll note, and as is included in the packet. I believe that these suggested amendments that we worked on with council and planning staff will make sure that we have an effective incentivization with the appropriate scope. So just thank you again, Chair Reamer, for your very early and very enthusiastic support of this zoning text amendment, all that you've done to get us to this point on biohealth. Appreciate, Councilmember Jawanda, all of your thoughtful work, and hope by the end of this discussion we will have your strong support of this as well. And thanks again to Ms. Nadeau for all of your terrific work. It really has been a pleasure navigating through the difficulties and the nuances of the zoning code with you on this. So thank you very much.
All right, great. Thanks for those comments. Appreciate your taking the time and the initiative to craft proposals for us to move forward on relating to helping our life sciences sector grow. We indeed do have a growth opportunity, and we've got to get everything behind this and clear the way and support it as much as possible. For another day, I think we really do need to focus some more on the time it takes for life sciences projects, especially to move through processes. I know we've done a signature campus provision, but we're still, I think, for speculative projects or for projects that don't rise to the level of signature campus, I think they're still subject to the same timeline that any development is subject to. And one of the unique things about life sciences is that once you have a breakthrough and you get your patent, you've only got 10 years to sell your product before it goes into, you lose your intellectual property. And so time is of the absolute essence. And if we want to be a place that companies can move quickly into production and commercialization, then every day on that 10-year window is going to count. And timing is essential. So I'm concerned that we have more to do to allow for life sciences development projects to move through on a really accelerated timeline. I know we've cleared that up for several components of it, but I think we ought to return to this conversation, perhaps in September, and take a broad look again and see what more we could potentially do. Having said that, this provision is an excellent one that focuses on some meaningful opportunities. So let's go to Lavu, and Casey Anderson is here. I don't know if you'd like to make some comments before we dive into the packet. Okay, Lavu.
Good morning. So the way I structured the packet, because the ZTA went through some changes from introduction to the version that Councilmember Friedson sent over to the sponsors, as well as the rest of the council. And for the public, those amendments were in the public hearing packet, so everyone should have seen it and been able to comment on it by now. So the way I structured the staff report is I'm going to go through the changes that have been made since then, which should cover everything that was in the ZTA. So the first change is removing the biohealth priority campus provisions. As Councilmember Friedson said, that was a ZTA that was passed earlier in the year, and the intent there is just to focus in on this ZTA, what it's trying to do, which is giving that additional height and flexibility for manufacturing and labs.
For those who are watching, can you step back, please, and just describe the function of the ZTA itself? Talk about what it does before we get into the changes that
This ZTA, not the campus one, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, yeah, sure. So the intent of this ZTA is to allow biohealth facilities to have additional height as well as flexibility and density. So the two ways they're going to be able to do that is there's going to be a height multiplier as well as allowing height averaging. And then the FAR can be reallocated. So if you have a certain amount of residential, you can transfer that and use it as commercial instead. So that should allow more urban biohealth facilities to achieve the height they need for their specific needs. They have large machinery, they have large lab equipment, So this allows them to get the height they need. And the way the ZTA has been narrowed and structured is so that they get that additional height without having too much of an impact on the surrounding area.
Okay. Okay, great.
So the second change was moving the language just for.
Oh, sorry, so
no,
the
go
first
ahead.
change is to remove the biohealth priority campus component. Is that, explain that a bit? Is that because we have already enacted that, or is that because you were seeking to apply a piece of that here and then reconsider?
So what was in the ZTA when it was introduced is that the biohealth campuses were going to be able to consolidate certain facilities and then provide certain parking provisions. So after looking at it and talking to some of the stakeholders and the developers who were using those campus provisions, they basically said, we're actually okay for now. We
Okay.
don't need this at the moment.
Got it.
So we thought
Okay.
we'll take it out then.
Thank you.
So next was moving where the language was. So originally it was in a section of the zoning ordinance called density and height allocation, and it said that this additional height and flexibility and density could be done with planning board approval. To make it clear how the planning board would go through that process, the language was all just moved to the optional method development section. So now these will all become optional method projects, and that'll allow them to go through the planning board process.
Gotcha.
Next is removing life sciences. So we've obviously had several biohealth ZTAs at this point, and the interesting thing in the zoning code is biohealth is not actually defined anywhere in the zoning ordinance. So what we do in these ZTAs is look at the different uses that do exist. So for the campus ZTA, the three uses were medical, scientific, manufacturing, production, research and development, and then life sciences. And if you look at bottom of page 2 of the memo I put in the definitions for each of those. There is some overlap, but for the purposes of this ZTA, life sciences has been removed since the focus is on the manufacturing and development and laboratory piece, which is really closer to the definitions of medical, scientific, manufacturing and production, as well as research and development. So the change here was just removing the life sciences use to make sure that this does get applied pretty narrowly and only when companies really need that additional height for something like manufacturing and labs, since life sciences had a lot of other uses and things you could do with it that are outside of that scope.
But to be clear, in the paragraph that lists the life sciences uses, all of those first uses are covered by research and development. That's up until the second sentence where it starts with life sciences also includes. That's what's not covered.
Yeah, the two important pieces, and thank you, Ms. Nadeau, I think you covered it really well, is exactly that. We want to focus this to make sure that we're getting biolabs and actual research and development. That's really the core focus here. And the life sciences includes all that, which are also already included in the other two uses, but it also includes a very broad categorization as well, which includes hospitals, it includes educational facilities and others, which would, broaden the scope of this. Now, I think separately we should look at the code and how we describe these things, because I do think that for the purposes of zoning, these are very different types of uses and should be treated differently, but we don't have the ability to do that as part of this effort. And so the goal here in working with planning, there was some real discomfort of how broad that category was. And so we tried to narrow it, remembering that these are additional heights beyond what are mapped in master plans, and so we're trying to target it to the extent that we can, as appropriate to the specific uses that we are trying to encourage and make easier, particularly in urban areas.
Got it?
So the next change is removing the reallocation of density provision for the LSC and EOF zones. And the reason is that residential FAR is not actually mapped in those zones, so they're not going to need to reallocate those density. And the way that those zones are set up, they tend to encourage commercial FAR anyways. So we just took that out since it wasn't really serving anything in that location.
Okay.
Next is requiring adaptive buildings public benefit points. So adaptive buildings is one of the many categories of public benefits under optional method. So for adaptive buildings, you get 15 points if you have a commercial or mixed-use building with minimum Florida floor-to-floor heights of at least 15 feet on any floor. As a little background, the public benefit here is that adaptive buildings can be adjusted to a diversity of uses. They tend to be more sustainable buildings because of this. So any project that's getting this additional height would have to satisfy that additional public benefit as well.
So a distinctive feature is 15 feet of height in the floors.
I realize I'm probably supposed to say floor to ceiling height, not
Floor to
floor to floor
ceiling.
height. Excuse that
Right,
typo.
floor to ceiling height.
The floor-to-floor height is generally 0.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the next change, as Councilmember Friedson noted in the beginning, is that these properties, in order to take advantage of these provisions, will have to abut or confront major roads. And in addition, they won't be allowed on sites that abut or confront a property in the agricultural, rural, and residential zones on a lot that's vacant or improved with an agricultural or residential use. So that's language you see other places in the zoning ordinance as well. The idea is you won't have this taller building directly next to a house.
All right.
And next, we're going to get into a bit of math. So there's going to be two ways to achieve additional height. So the first is if a building is 100 feet or less, you can have 1.5 times the mapped height up to 150 feet. So that's your 1.5 times multiplier. The next method of getting additional height is going to be height averaging, and there's two different ways that this can be done. So the height of any section of a building can vary. So I put in some fake numbers in here so it's easier to picture. But suppose a building had a mapped height of 150 feet. You could have one portion of the building be 175, another portion be 125. So the overall average bulk height is still 150, but you could have one section be slightly higher, presumably because that's where you'd put your taller lab equipment on that corner of the building. So the overall bulk is the same to anybody, standing on the street or next door, but the company themselves can get that additional height to achieve their needs. The second way is you can also do the height averaging across the site. So if you have a large property where you have a mapped height of 75 feet and a mapped height of 125 feet, you can adjust those heights so that the average is all the same still. If you read the ZTA itself, it reads a little confusing, and it's mostly because it's explaining how to calculate an average, just so that you're not, so if you have, a small portion of your property is 50 and a large portion is 100, it's still going to average the same because it'll do it proportionally. And then the third part of this will be that you can use both the multiplier and the height averaging. So in most cases, a person's probably going to choose the multiplier because it's just the simplest way. You take your height, you add 1.5. But if you average height first and then use the multiplier, you can get a marginal increase. So like using the numbers here, if you had a parcel mapped at 50, could use height averaging to be at 25 and 75, and then do the multiplier so they end up at 115 feet versus just 75 feet.
For the math geeks out there, this is like the zoning equivalent of PEMDAS for anybody who's doing the order of operations of
Lawyers
in
are
math.
notoriously bad at math.
That's
so.
basically
Seeing a lot of blank stares in this room.
all right. Never mind. That's what that is. It just depends on the order of the operations of the math, which slightly in certain circumstances could change the outcome.
Yeah. So that is the end of the math section, luckily.
Fuzzy math.
So the next change is removing the reference to overlay zones. So the ZTA originally said that these provisions would trump any contrary or restrictive provisions in an overlay zone, just so it could be used anywhere in the county. There were a lot of concerns about how this affects the master plan process. If you have something in a zoning ordinance, that's going to trump anything you do in a master plan. So that provision has been removed.
The overlay zones.
The overlay zones, yes.
All right.
Which isn't to say you wouldn't be able to do it in an overlay zone, just if an overlay zone already says we have something more strict than this, then you would not be allowed to use this.
Got it.
So next up is a proposed amendment we received. There is written testimony about this from a company called Warren Avenue Investors, and the request was to add industrial zones. So as a recap, right now it's CR, LSC, and EOF. So first, I looked at all the zoning in the county. There is a map at C36, I believe, that shows all the industrial areas. There's not very many. The average heights in most of these industrial zones are 50 to 70 feet. There's very few outliers. So if you had a 50-foot building with 15-foot high ceilings that was using a lab, it would be about a 3-story lab building. So a few policy considerations here. This is not currently in the ZTA, the industrial zones, but they tend to have loading docks already. They tend to have high ceilings. You know, labs, manufacturing, all sounds industrial. But the issue is there's really limited industrial space in the county. And the way zoning is usually set up is you want to make sure that you're not having too much height or density or commercial development, because you want industrial land to stay pretty cheap and affordable because it's very limited. And so if you allow this additional height and you change all this density, you could end up having industrial uses pushed out by non-industrial ones, which is why council staff does not recommend adding industrial zones at the time. But because we received a letter, I did want to leave room for the committee to discuss it.
Thank you. Well, I've had a chance to look at that letter, and the specific location that they're interested, to me, seems quite appropriate for what they would like to do. And, you know, I definitely get the argument about light industrial because that tends to be much lower in height. And if we were to allow a significant size, bio facility in light industrial, that would change the economics of light industrial. But I'm not so sure that has the same impact in moderate industrial because it tends to have higher heights already. And, a lot of these uses are allowed. So I'm not sure that it is a significant impact. And I'd like to talk this over here, but it seems to me that there's room to allow for use in the moderate industrial, and therefore, certainly the known project would be eligible to add the additional number of feet that it needs for the equipment. They're allowed to do what they want to do in that zone already. That's not really the question. It's just whether they can stack some more equipment on top, and then at the same time would allow us to kind of modulate the impact and watch it, and maybe we could ask planning to keep a close eye on that and send us some evaluation of it as it goes to see if there is a significant impact. But I want to just see if I'm understanding this correctly, what the potential impact would be of limiting such a change to the IM rather than not light industrial. And frankly, I don't know that we need to cover heavy industrial either. I doubt it would be relevant anyway. But Chair Anderson.
Well, I guess I'll just make it clear I'm just speaking for myself because this was in front of the board and it's last minute change. I'm really ambivalent about this. On the one hand, I do not subscribe to the council staff's theory that we should be reserving this for some other industrial use. These are basically like industrial uses. I don't know what we're saving them for if it's not for life sciences related quasi-industrial type of uses, including manufacturing and R&D. I mean, are we saving this land for artisanal glass blowers or something like the county executive likes to talk about? I just have no idea what that means. So I just want to disassociate myself from that whole idea that we've had for a long time that we're saving land for industrial uses. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. And but that's another discussion for another day in general. On the other hand, this is not urban, and I guess it seems to me that if the idea here was to create opportunities to create bio-related opportunities in more urban environments, this is seeming like it's a little bit far afield.
Suburban, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, almost exurban, I think, maybe in this
far.
particular location. I'm not trying to cast aspersions on it. I'm just saying it seems
Actually,
like it's,
believe it or not, it's actually quite close to the Shady Grove Metro.
Yeah.
It's about a mile and a half.
well, look, I'm not saying I'm allergic to it. I'm just saying that
Yeah.
it seems like it's not quite in the core of what was intended by the ZTA, and I thought we were trying to just sort of confine this to the set of problems that have been identified and take it one step at a time. I don't really have a violent bad reaction to this particular project, but just a little bit hesitant about opening things up in that way. I mean, the height limits in the master plans were considered for these type of uses, and they were considered appropriate at the time, and it just seems to me to be generally good practice unless there's a very specific reason to kind of leave those alone until you go through the master plan process. But again, I'm not here to fall on my sword over it. I just think that it's not quite what the core of what I understood the sponsor would be trying to do, and it is kind of coming at the last minute.
All right, well, appreciate those comments. Councilmember Jawando had a question. All right, Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Chair Anderson, you kind of answered it at the end there. These uses are allowed under the height limits that are set under the master plan for these areas. The letter was written as happens a lot, not begrudging those seeking to move a project forward, but, for one specific instance. But this would be, Ms. Nadeau, this would be applicable to all of these zones, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think it's generally good practice to change an entire policy for one instance either. And I think the master plan is more appropriate place to do these. And again, the size of the project you said, I think up to 3 stories could already accommodate. So yeah, I'd be hesitant as well at this point to change rezone all of these areas to include something that I do think is a little out of the intention of this overall ZTA as well. So, okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. A couple things. I appreciate the conversation here. I think it's an important one. I agree with a lot of what has been said. I don't agree necessarily with all of what has been said, but a few things to note. One, I don't think it was last minute. With respect, there was feedback immediately after we introduced this, making this request, and we had suggested this should be taken up at committee. It wasn't something that I thought should be moved forward. So I don't think that it necessarily was a last minute request. I also agree, though, that the initial purpose of the zoning text amendment was focused on urban bio. And so this is a bit outside of the scope of the original intent. So I think that is also true. I'm trying to understand the chair's recommendation here. I think that's what is new here, frankly, which I think we need a little bit more time to process of what, the implications would be if you didn't do all industrial, but you specifically did moderate industrial and what impact that would have. And I'm just trying to understand to make sure that I know there's light industrial, there's heavy industrial. What would be encompassed, just so we all understand, in moderate industrial? How would we put that into practice if we were to move something like that forward?
So I apologize, I did forget my zoning code, so I don't know the exact, I don't know the exact uses in each. I mean, the heights are very different. So light industrial has a 25 to 50 foot range usually, whereas moderate has the 25 to 120. So I do think of the 3, moderate probably does make the most sense if you're only going to pick one, because heavy industrial, I mean, they can already have a range of 35 to 200, putting aside that they might not be mapped at that height, which is a separate issue, that most of the industrial properties are mapped at 50 to 70, regardless of which zone they're in.
So can I join you here? In your second bullet below the table on page 5 there,
Yep.
You noted that the majority of IM, so I was suggesting, I'd be concerned about the impact on light industrial. If suddenly a biofacility can move into light industrial at, 70 feet or something like that, that seems like a big change. However, in the moderate industrial, a lot of the properties are already zoned at 50 or even several are 70 to 80 feet. So those uses are already allowed in the zones. I mean, you can do it, right? Am I right?
So the uses that are allowed are the medical, scientific, manufacturing,
Right.
and production.
So
Yeah. Research and development.
these are
is not
already
allowed.
allowed. Like, you can do all this already in the zone. So the impact of being able to do a 60-foot, 50-foot, or 70-foot building in the IM, that's status quo. Because you can, the scientific applies. So therefore, all we really are doing is allowing for that height adjustment, which, to me, seems like a desirable additional flexibility. And the instance that we have is a good one that perhaps does exist in a few other places. If I understand it, it's basically an office building that was built in this zone, I think. I mean, it's like a suburban office park that is not in the best location anymore for suburban office. And they'd like to convert it. If I'm understanding correctly, they'd like to convert it to essentially a laboratory type use. I think it's probably bringing it more close to the intent of the zone, if I'm right, which I think I am. So, what this is doing is allowing for that additional height in order to deal with the fact that there's very heavy equipment, which again is consistent with the zone. So the thought here is, let's target the impact where it's needed is also where it's smallest, which is in the IM.
Yeah, as we're sitting here, I'm listening to this conversation, it also occurs to me, to the extent that these are basically office buildings that have some R&D or manufacturing capacity that's perhaps included, you're also running into an issue that a lot of the development standards that apply in some of these other zones are not going to be applicable. So you're going to get buildings that are set way back from the street, surrounded by parking, et cetera. We're sort of trying to get away from that, and I didn't mean to cast aspersions on it when I said it was last minute. I just meant that it kind of came in late in the process. So I think, honestly, this would benefit from a little bit more consideration about how these type of projects would be built. It's not so much that it's the end of the world if somebody gets a little bit of additional height in these zones. It's more a question of, like, what kind of project do you want that is a life science project that may effectively be an office building with some other stuff that's sort of effectively incidental from a point of view of the development impact or the impact on the built environment. Do you want to have a pretty permissive set of zoning rules that concerning development standards for those buildings when otherwise you might be looking for something that conforms to a little bit higher expectation in terms of design and urban form? So I guess to me that just I don't have a fully baked set of arguments here, but that just I think highlights why it might be prudent to not go beyond the original scope by too much and think about this a little more. As I say, it's not as though it's going to be some kind of catastrophe if this were extended a little bit in terms of scope, but I think you can see where this might play out a little bit differently in terms of the kind of projects that would be approvable, and I'm not sure anybody has really spent a lot of time thinking about what the implications of that are. You follow
Just
me?
one comment before I pass it to Councilmember Friesen, and we could potentially talk about reuse, if it's redevelopment rather than fresh development, but yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Before Ms. Nadeau, I'm sure, wants to chime in here, I think it's an interesting thought of narrowing industrial just to moderate industrial. I think that is better than what originally was being proposed, which was far broader than I would have been comfortable with at this point. But I do think it would bear some further analysis that we don't have in front of us right now, both by planning and council staff and for us to consider. So I would suggest that we, potentially do some of that. And when we bring this up at full council, it'll give us, a little bit of time and the full body can agree on that. I don't think there's a lot of disagreement on everything else. And I think this would be a reasonable thing for us to discuss and flesh out with planning in a better position and council staff in a better position to be able to provide us some information of exactly what that narrowing of the proposal would mean and how it would proceed. So if that is okay with colleagues, I think I'd be most comfortable with that, of us moving this forward as recommended and leaving that as a discussion point at full council with some additional opportunity for analysis.
And if it'd be okay with the sponsor, we might have some input on just like how that could be applied in a way that wouldn't just get us projects that are less than.
Yeah, and as an ongoing conversation as well, I think if there's, a more nuanced proposal even than the one that is before us, I mean, I certainly would be interested and open to that in the interim between now and then, but I think certainly discussing it when we have more information would be, I think, prudent for all of us.
I think that works for me.
I agree as well.
All right, Councilmember Rojando agrees as well. So, we'll go through some additional analysis, crafting, input, and we'll have something ready for full council. Great. I want to make a very general comment, which is that, we have to be to double down on bio, we've got to be fully embracing suburban bio. And there, suburban bio is great. Like that's always been our strength. We're hopeful that urban bio is doable in the county. There isn't any yet, and we're trying to make it more possible, other than United Therapeutics. We're trying to make it possible. And so that's what these changes are intended to help facilitate. But we also have to really be fully behind the market where it wants to be, which is typically suburban bio. And, that is fantastic. We're so lucky to have, bio, however bio wants to be. And I just think we need to keep in mind that we want to put wind in the sails of bio in however it is, the market wants to make it happen. All right. Well, keep going here. That was the last item in the packet.
It was. That was the last change in what's before you in the ZTA. We, of course, had our racial equity and social justice impact statement that noted a small negative impact because the benefits would disproportionately accrue to white business owners and employees. There were some really great recommendations from OLO, such as requiring reporting from biohealth firms, investing in workforce development, as well as in small businesses. But of course, none of those are things that can be done in a ZTA, just something for council to think about in terms of other policies and types of legislation and tools.
And of course, we're working hard on workforce development strategies in, general. We're doing everything we can that we're able to, conceive of to move forward on workforce development and as well as supporting small business. So, I think it's helpful to highlight the connection between those two policy issues, even if you don't necessarily legislate on them in the same context. Any comments?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's also, there's a broader effort, as colleagues know, that the Economic Development Corporation is part of one of only a relatively small number of jurisdictions to take part in inclusive and equitable economic development. And so we're going to have a report on that with some action items as well. And I think there's going to be a number of opportunities, some of which may provide for legislative opportunities and budget opportunities, and some of which won't. That will be more operational and practical than perhaps legislative and policy. So this is an ongoing conversation. I'm glad it's part of the discussion, but certainly there's more work that can be done in venues that allow that work to happen. So thanks.
All right, so we have an amended ZTA before us. So all those in favor say aye. Aye. Oh, sorry. Yes, please join us. I apologize. Join us if you needed to share some comments. Please, come on down. I'm sorry. I could have invited you earlier. My mistake. No. Make your presence known.
My name is Mark Etheridge. I manage the Water Resources section over at DPS. We'd sent some comments earlier on the draft with respect to the stormwater management element. I think there is an issue with that doesn't correspond well to state code, where it talks about consolidating the stormwater management and locating it on other properties and those kinds of things. you have to understand, our code is predicated on state law. We review and approve stormwater management plans as a delegation of authority from the Maryland Department of the Environment. And they actually reviewed and approved our code for stormwater management. There are certain elements that we can change. We can be more restrictive than the state minimum standard, but we can't be less restrictive. And the wording in the code to allow the consolidation is less restrictive than the state allows. I just want to point that out.
So we're not allowed to be more restrictive. The issue here would be that
We can be
this
more
will
restrictive,
create
but not
some-
less.
I mean, we're not allowed to be less restrictive. So the issue here is it could create some ambiguity.
Yeah.
And an applicant could say, well, I am allowed, see here, and then you would say, well, you're not allowed. And
Yeah.
those kind of ambiguities create delays and problems. So what do, let's hear from our
I'll be
sponsor
honest,
first.
I don't recall receiving anything, so if something was sent over, then I'm not sure that it reached me, so maybe Ms. Nadeau.
Yeah, I can help with that. So yes, that was something in the original ZTA. It was in the section about the biohealth campus. So that language is coming out. So it hopefully isn't an issue anymore.
All right, problem solved.
Okay, so mood issue, the other changes that we made unrelated to this has addressed this issue.
Yes.
Great.
All
Okay,
right.
well, now back to our regularly
Our
scheduled
favorite kind
consensus here.
Our favorite kind of issue to solve, the ones that are already solved. Okay? All right. Councilmember Tawanda, are you there? All right.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. I just wasn't sure if you had said I imagine you are, but.
Yeah, I'm in support. I
Yeah.
did want to chime in on the racial equity stuff.
Oh,
I
okay,
think it's
great.
important.
Yeah, please.
You know, I raised this with the previous policy that's related to this, and tried to offer some amendments. Didn't work out, but we do need to have a much larger and broader discussion, because everything in a silo is fine, but we have to be intentional about providing opportunities to address deep-seated racial inequities across all sectors, all industries, everything we do. And so I appreciate the acknowledgement of it in the packet, and we're going to have to continue to do that. But I am in favor.
Thank you. Great. Okay, great. Then we're all approved, recommending to the council recommending to the council, and we'll have a follow-up conversation. If it, I guess we'll talk about the timing of the ZTA going to the full council. If the potential amendment seems like it would be better to have another quick session at the committee, we can discuss that, but preferably we would be able to do it at full council and move this forward, expeditiously. What's that? Yeah, I mean, I hope full council too. So let's hope that we have something that the full council would not need to spend extensive time discussing.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of two things I think is the likely result of this. Either there'll be some level of consensus or we'll be ready to discuss it because it'll be narrowly tailored, or this will raise a broader question, to your point, about supporting suburban bio, generally, and having adaptive uses of building. We don't want vacant buildings in areas, et cetera, and there may, it may require a standalone focus on this question too. So I think one of those two things is the likeliest, at least from my perspective. I hope that we can.
I think both.
Move the
Hopefully
zoning
we get a
text
tailored
amendment at full
and-
council,
Yes.
and with or without this included. But I think it certainly bears further discussion.
Hopefully because we don't have time on the calendar for another ZTA. So this is our one shot for this council session. So, I think this is a likely consensus item. So let's just see what we bring together.
I can also make sure to touch base I'll prepare it for full council, hopefully before council recesses, but I can touch base with the Fed committee to let you know what we
Yeah,
find.
please do that.
And then you can decide if you want to have another committee session.
Again, I want to say, this is already allowed. We're talking about buildings that already generally are allowed to go, many of them to 70 feet. If they're at 50 feet, we're saying you can go to 75 feet. The uses are already allowed, so there isn't a significant impact in the IM other than a little tiny bit of additional height. So hopefully that will assuage concerns. All right. Thank you so much. Look forward to continuing this conversation. Appreciate everyone being here today.
Interdisciplinary